On August the 13th, Russian troops fired warning shots in front of a merchant vessel in the Black Sea, then boarded the ship.
Keep calm and listen to me! Okay. What is the capital? This is captain.
Cue outrage. Ukraine said the action violated the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and called on the international community to take action. It was a worrying episode, but Kyiv had an even bigger problem, and it was this. Russia was entirely within its rights to act as it had. And there's more. Having pulled out of the grain deal, Russia is desperate for the world to think they've put a blockade on Ukrainian ports when actually none exists. The Black Sea could provide the long-term solution to this war, but there's a lot of odd stuff going on in those waters right now. And I don't just mean the mermaids. First things first. When we talk about legality in the context of this war and what military forces can and cannot do, let's be very clear. This is an illegal war. Russia had no legitimate reason to invade and has committed numerous war crimes in the process. So there are no legitimate actions or targets. Having said that, the world community deems that an international armed conflict does exist, and Turkey, custodian of the Montreux Convention that regulates maritime traffic through the Turkish Straits and into the Black Sea in the time of warfare, has enacted its provisions. All of this means that regardless of the illegal actions that started the war, there are now certain legal responsibilities placed on both Ukraine and Russia. That is a good thing, as laws of warfare exist to try to bring a measure of justice and humanity to the most inhumane of situations. Witness the arrest warrant that has been issued by the International Criminal Court for Vladimir Putin. One of these internationally recognised maritime measures is the right of what's called visit and search. This allows a warship during a time of conflict to determine the true character of merchant ships encountered outside neutral waters. Within a country's territorial waters, the state can board any vessel it likes with just cause. They don't need to be at war, which is why British Royal Marines were able to board an Iranian oil tanker passing through the Strait of Gibraltar on a sanctions-busting run to Syria in 2019. But back to now, and by boarding, searching and releasing the vessel in the Black Sea in the way that it did, no damage, no violence other than the warning shots, Russia was acting entirely in accordance with the law of naval warfare. Where things get a bit blurry, however, is when we talk about blockades. And with 70% of Ukrainian exports moving via the Black Sea, a blockade on their ports could cause the country real pain. Under the 1856 Declaration of Paris, a blockade is a lawful method of warfare designed to prevent ships of all states from entering or leaving specified coastal areas under enemy control, to deny the enemy economic revenue from its exports and the benefits of imports to support its war effort. The all states part of the provision is important and something I'll come back to in a minute, because Russia would really like us to miss that bit. First though, what is a naval blockade? Well, to be recognised as such, two criteria have to be met. Number one, it has to be declared by a state by telling everyone the dates, locations and so on. Number two, and most importantly, it has to be effective. What this means is that if I want to reserve for myself the right to interfere with your military and civil maritime traffic, up to and including sinking your ships, I have to be capable of putting my own assets in harm's way. Now, this is more than just good etiquette. If I say I've put a blockade around your port, but then don't bother enforcing it, either because I want to use my ships elsewhere, or because you have the nasty habit of sending maritime drones out to sink me, I'm not allowed to do any of the other blockade-y type things elsewhere that the law allows. Sometimes, of course, it might be better to make it very clear to an enemy that you are targeting their military assets only and not their merchant ships or neutral vessels. Hence, in the 1982 Falklands War, Britain established an exclusion zone. And in 1962, during the missile crisis, the US put a quarantine around Cuba.
To halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba from whatever nation or port where they're found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons be turned back. This quarantine will be extended, if needed, to other types of cargo and carriers.
These terms are important. Remember, a blockade has to be enforced against ships from all states. I am coming back to that, I promise. First though, a pebble from history. During the Falklands War, the Soviet Union said the British exclusion zone was unlawful because it proclaimed vast expanses of the high seas closed to ships of other countries. Delivering this broadside, the Soviet ambassador to London forgot to add that as the exclusion zone was limited only to Argentine naval assets, the Royal Navy did have ships in harm's way and the de facto blockade was effective. It was valid under the 1856 Declaration of Paris, to which Russia was one of the original parties. That habit, that pebble of trying to divert attention or momentarily forget treaties and obligations they had signed up to, ripples today in Russia's efforts to get us to believe that they have established a blockade. Why? Well, because their Black Sea flagship is now the centrepiece of what will one day be Ukraine's scuba diving tourism industry, their Kilo-class subs that are diesel electric and not nuclear powered, as one so-called defence expert called them recently from this very seat, have been moved back to Russia, and what ships are left in Sevastopol are guarded by dolphins. Russia can't put in place a proper blockade even though it might want to. It is trying to have all the benefits of a blockading state with none of the responsibilities, what's called a constructive or paper blockade, i.e. not a real one. For proof, we need only look at July the 30th, when 6 merchant vessels disregarded a tub-thumping warning to shipping posted 11 days earlier by Russia's defence ministry and sailed through the Black Sea to the Ukrainian port of Izmail on the Danube. All vessels openly transmitted their destination over their automatic identification system, but Russia didn't do anything, and I doubt that was out of goodwill. Then, 2 weeks later, the container ship, the Joseph Schult, carrying over 2,000 containers loaded with 30,000 tons of cargo, left the port of Odessa, passing through the Turkish Straits 2 days later. Why was this ship not stopped if a blockade was in place? Well, remember I said that under a proper blockade, ships of all states are stopped by the blockading force? Guess which flag the Joseph Schultz operates under? Hong Kong, or to give the place the correct title these days, China. So even if Russia had the means to enforce a blockade, Putin wouldn't want to upset his new buddy in Beijing, hence the fudgy, very Russian-y thing of claiming one thing, hoping we all get scared and confused, then doing the exact opposite. Of course, agricultural products are Ukraine's most important exports, totaling almost $30 billion in 2021. That's about 40% of the country's total exports. Before the full-scale invasion, Ukraine accounted for 10% of the world wheat market, 15% of the corn market, and half the global sunflower oil market. Russia wants to destroy that trade and will use any means it can to do so, by trying to claim a blockade where none exists, for example. Moscow also sees the grain issue as a political wedge to divide Ukraine from friends in Europe. The more the ports are smashed up, the more Ukraine has to send grain by road. It's too costly to send it far, so it ends up flooding the European market, driving down prices and upsetting allies, Poland in particular. What can be done? Well, on that last point, someone, the EU perhaps, could pay to transport Ukrainian grain further afield and hopefully end what the US State Department said on August 14th was weaponizing hunger. And what about military options? Admiral James Stavridis, the former Supreme Allied Commander Europe, suggested that NATO ships could lead a convoy system through the Black Sea. This is problematic for a number of reasons. Put NATO hardware close to Russia's and there's an obvious risk of miscalculation and escalation. There's also the potential that insurers, far from being reassured by such a move, could be spooked into thinking the situation was more serious than they'd assessed, thereby driving up insurance premiums. Both situations could be impacted by Russia's other bad habit, that of engaging in brinkmanship. They do after all, have a proven track record of doing stupid, aggressive and inflammatory things. Any convoy system would also put pressure on NATO's Black Sea members as, under the Montreux Convention, the aggregate tonnage of all non-Black Sea navies operating in the area at any given time cannot exceed 45,000 tonnes. That's about 5 decent-sized destroyers. And all those vessels have to rotate out after 21 days. So even if the US, the Brits, French or anyone else wanted to get involved, the burden would fall on Romania, Bulgaria and most of all, Turkey. Plenty of opportunity for Russia to create mischief. Barring a sudden change in the land war, the Black Sea, with its potential impact on the long-term economies of both Ukraine and Russia, could hold the key to how this war ends. For now, Russia is getting around sanctions by, among other things, moving oil through so-called grey ships, those operating without insurance or under legally questionable flags of convenience. Landlocked Mongolia, for example, is not really known to be a great seafaring nation. But the international community is getting wise to Moscow's ways. All of which means that whilst we should criticise Russia for starting this war, we must be careful to get the legalities correct over such things as visit and search and what is not a blockade, for example. Russia should be encouraged to use the laws of war, even if it causes Ukraine momentary frustration, because they will have nowhere to hide if they do. We cannot allow Russia to pull the old Soviet ambassador's trick of trying to muddy the already very murky Black Sea. Defence in Depth is a weekly video output by the Telegraph of the big defence stories. If you'd like a daily fix of content about the war in Ukraine, I'd suggest Ukraine the Latest, the Telegraph's podcast. For more defence stories, we've left links in the description below, and if you have a topic you'd like us to cover, please let us know in the comments. Please do visit our website for the latest updates, news and analysis, or failing that, you can read the paper.